Hello, everyone. I am tuning in today to talk a little bit about inner child work and how that manifests in my practice. It's something that I mention every now and then when I'm talking about the kind of traditional ways that I navigate um, my own emotional health. And inner child work is something that was introduced to me by a therapist. And since then, I have done a lot of like workshops and other practices around it. So the idea that I have about it is kind of a conglomerate of the things that really worked for me. And I wanted to give a little context about that in case you heard about that in one of my videos and wanted to explore it a little more. Um, so I will start by saying that there are a lot of different ways to do it. There are much more complex ways to do it. And also, I wanted to name that this kind of work is really deep and it does kind of go into, the realm of sometimes shadow work. It can sometimes re-stimulate trauma, especially for those of us that have PTSD. I've been in situations where I've been doing an inner child meditation and then kind of triggered something and had a very physical emotional release or emotional response, which for me is useful as part of the work, but it's not always appropriate to, that's not always what we're looking for when we're looking for something to ease our emotional pain, right? So I kind of wanted to name some of that. Some of us, when we go into the idea of like spiritual healing or emotional regulation, we're looking for relief. And for me at least, when it comes to inner child work, the relief comes a lot later. And it's not super immediate. So let's get into it. Sorry, I'm just gonna like tune in a little. So, for me, inner child work is really about parenting and reparenting the inner child. So, if you're starting out on your inner child journey, you might want to start just cultivating a relationship with your ultimate innocence. And for those of you that are doing this alongside magical work, a good card to work with is the Sun card. When we are children, we are vibrant and we have a zest for life. And those of us that do this kind of magical work, we come to understand that the child within us often still has access to a lot of wisdom and a lot of intuition. That's how we learn so fast and how we integrate into our familial systems and how we operate with the world. It's really interesting to I do a little bit of time traveling spiritual work, and sometimes when I go back to visit my childhood self, I find that there is so much wisdom and a huge well of love and forgiveness. There's this sense that everything happens for a reason, and that anyway, so the first thing to do is really to get to know your inner child. Some people do this with photos of themselves as children, and they will actually physically talk to a photo of themselves and give their inner child at that time, affirmations and love and compliments and stories about where they are as adults and what they have to look forward to in the future. What they apologize for, what they forgive their inner child for. And, if you're doing this exercise with an actual photo of yourself, it really offers you the opportunity to notice places within you that still align with the feelings of, the dissonant feelings that we collect in childhood: fear, embarrassment, punishment, anger, sadness, loneliness. A lot of my work has really been about reminding myself not to abandon myself. There's a lot of, memories around neglect and not feeling seen and not feeling heard. And what I can offer to my inner child now is just seeing and hearing them. So one intentional way to do it is to, when you're not stimulated, when you're in meditation, create time and space to find some kind of relationship with different ages of yourself. And I don't really do it through photos, I do it through memories. And how the work actually started for me was I noticed, I was learning about this stuff, about how to reparent the inner child and show up with grace in moments of old fear or old loneliness or old abandonment issues. And inviting myself to realize that those are not what's going on in the present, because that is like the number one issue that I have with my re-stimulation, is that it's hard to feel a feeling that kind of resonates with that old feeling, but parse out the fact that the reality is actually different. The reality is that I am an adult and that people are allowed to leave and come into my life whenever they want. And it doesn't say anything about my value as a human being. It says something about their capacity to show up for me and their needs as an autonomous human being. And so, which feels like super potent for so many of us. Like, it's, it starts to get in the territory of, really understanding the adults that were supposed to show up for us in a certain way, promised to show up for us in a certain way. We as children are also given this narrative of how parents are supposed to show up. And we hold these adults in our life to a standard of perfection that we deserve, because we are these pure souls and we deserve perfect parents. But unfortunately, we don't get it, right? So in my journey with getting to know my inner child, I also had to learn to understand that this concept of perfect parenting is a place of wounding. And shifting the paradigm in that way is extremely difficult. It is very hard work. It requires, for those of us that were very damaged by our childhood, we don't want to relate to the adults that did that to us. We don't want to understand where that came from for them. And, for a lot of us, we don't even really have to get there. And for a lot of us, we might not for years and years and years. I said for a long time that I wasn't ever going to forgive the people that hurt me, even if I was able to heal myself. I did not think that forgiveness was on the table. And it took a lot of work to get there. And that work isn't for everyone. It's not supposed to be. We're all on our own journey. There's really no pressure for forgiveness or reconciliation with the adult aspect or the parental aspects or the guardians, the people that both showed up for us and failed us. Though they are worthy of forgiveness, it is not your responsibility to bestow that upon them. Because we are all worthy of love and forgiveness, every single one of us. So getting to know the inner child, understanding the paradigm of the perfect parents, those are the first two. And then it's about offering your inner child the parenting that you wish you had gotten and the parenting that you deserved. So I'll give two examples of this. One example is the, I'll just talk about like how it sometimes works for me. Like if I'm in a situation where someone has yelled at me, honestly, when people raise their voice, when people overstep my boundaries with this kind of like escalated projection about what it must be that I'm doing and how I must feel because of my reactions. Those are very sensitive places for me around inner child work, because of like, being gaslit and not having my version of reality trusted or honored. And so in the moment, it is very easy for me to have an inflammatory reaction and kind of want to defend my version of the situation and have my voice heard around that. And to have my voice heard can be difficult, because when people are already projecting and already in this state of thinking that they know what's going on with me based on external things, then they must, or like the way that I kind of reduce my stimulation around that is by understanding that for someone to negate my reality or to not really want to understand my reality, they must also be in some kind of story, right? So I can try to put my story in their space, but until they work through this story that they have in their head, they're really not going to be able to receive it, right? So this is very complex interpersonal magic, right? Some of it is psychology, but a lot of it is kind of alchemy, really. And so instead of putting my story at them when they're doing whatever they're doing, I instead go inward to my inner child who has been through this before, who by going through this has created a response in me that says, protect yourself from this, defend yourself from this. There's also a chapter of my childhood where I would run away from that entirely and hide myself. So I go into my inner child, I see what kind of stimulation is occurring in there, and then to my inner child, either in my mind or if I can create space and be alone. I even sometimes do this out loud, alone with myself, or I can do it in my mind in the moment through practice. It's very difficult. And just offer the inner child this comforting, I'll say comforting words like, your reality is valid. The way that you experience your feelings is to be trusted and respected. I'm sorry that this person doesn't have the space to see that right now, but I do. And I have the ability, I go by Britt now, but I used to go by Brittany when I was a kid. So I'm even like tearing up just thinking about it. Like I will say as Britt to Brittany, Brittany, I'm really here for you. And whatever it is that you need to say about your experience of this reality, I am here to listen. And of course, it would be nice if the people around me could do that. If they could say, hey, I see you're emotional. I would love to hear what's going on for you. But often in these situations of conflict that bring up those feelings, I'm also just going to tap because I'm reliving the feelings as I'm talking about them. And that's the grand story, is while it would be nice for other people to give us that relief, it is only us that can give us that relief. And it is through giving our inner child that experience of being, in my situation, it's being heard about our reality in conflict. Or in some situations, it's like, whatever, I could go on and on and on. But for you, it might be like something like having to tell your inner child, hey, them leaving had nothing to do with you. It 100% had to do with what they were going through and what they were capable of. And you are a bright, worthy individual. And anyone in the world would be lucky to be in your life. But the only people that really deserve to be in your life are the people that can show up for you in the way that you need. So it's okay to miss them. And it's okay to feel hurt by their absence and by them leaving you. But it's also okay for you to seek out the love that you truly deserve. And for as long as you feel sad about them leaving you, I, the adult version of you, will be here to listen to and honor those feelings for as long as it takes, right? So that's around abandonment. And then there are other situations where it's like, when it comes to the yelling, it's like you can go to your inner child and say, it is not okay for anyone to have an emotional reaction like that creates fear and hurts your ears and intimidates you and threatens you. But everyone has inflammatory emotional reactions sometimes. And you don't deserve to be on the other end of someone else not being able to emotionally regulate. You don't deserve that. And for as long as you need to have feelings of fear and betrayal and confusion, I will be here to listen. And I add the I will be here to listen part because it invites our inner child to communicate with us from a magical standpoint. communicating with our inner child is communicating with one of the most pure, wise versions of ourselves. The one that, no matter how far back you have to go, because sometimes we start our coping mechanisms pretty early. Like for me, I have to go back pretty young to find a version of myself that can forgive someone who hurt me, right? Because then when people started hurting me, I started abstaining from forgiveness because, I didn't feel like it was something that I was capable of at the time, right? Which, the grand story of the inner child healing is that we do these things. We create these coping mechanisms to protect ourselves from hurt. Everything that we did when we were that age, that as sometimes it comes to adulthood and it's like, man, that coping mechanism is really not useful for me as an adult. It was a very smart and bright idea for a little child you who was wise, close to wisdom, and had all of this energetic support for creating safety for themselves. So each coping mechanism that we bring from the harmful parts of our childhood is something to be honored and respected. You can even tell your inner child, like, I understand that this pattern served you, and I celebrate and honor the fact that you were able to protect us during that time, that you had the wisdom to be able to create safety in an otherwise very unsafe situation. But now we are adults and we don't need that anymore. I am so glad that you did that for us. And now it's time to go ahead and start letting it go, because I am here now to create that safety for you. It is not a burden that you have to carry. And it's not a burden that you should ever have had to carry, right? Cool. So that's one way to do it, is when you're in the moment of the inflammatory reaction, try to create space for that. But I will say that most of this work also gets done for me, and for a lot of people, through meditation. And so instead of waiting until like you're in an argument or you are in a breakup or you are in some kind of chaotic situation, you can do it intentionally by creating space for yourself, either at your altar or in your meditation practice, and kind of just, rest, take some deep breaths, do a little stretching, and then you can just invite your inner child into the space. And you might already have some ideas about ways that your inner child is hurting or has been hurt, that you can bring some adult like protection and love and security into. Or you can also just be listening for wherever the pain is. Even if we're not in a direct conflict or we're not in a oppressive or chaotic situation, the things that are going on around us are always communicating with every level of our being. That includes our emotional, spiritual, our future selves, our other dimensional selves, and our past selves, right? So our past self still has things to say. Speaking of children, about what's going on around us. And if we're ignoring that and we are not saying, like, if we're not healing the thing that happened 2 years ago that we can't get over, or like 2 months ago that we can't get over, a good place to start might be to invite the inner child and just ask them, like, how do you feel about this person leaving us? How do you feel about this person yelling at us? How do you feel about this person betraying us, right? All right, well, we did all we could. Feels like a good place to stop. And if you have any questions about this, please ask. I'm sending you lots and lots of love.